Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 23rd of May 2023, and these are the stories that we will be discussing in detail with the course of our show. We'll begin with the G20 meeting that is on tourism being held in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Pakistan has highlighted what India is trying to do, normalize the situation in a territory that has been disputed, where a situation has been unresolved since decades, and countless UN resolutions have also remained there. Our Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Saab is in the Azad Jammu and Kashmir region. He addressed a gathering in Bagh as well today, and also addressed the Azad Jammu and Kashmir Legislative Assembly and highlighted Pakistan's resolve to stand by their Kashmiri brethren. At the same time, we see a lot of other countries also who are slowly and steadily desisting from attending this moot in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. China has been the first, that has been followed by Turkey, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and other important countries. Now, this is a very important step taken by these countries, and it puts forward a point of view of those countries as far as Pakistan's and the Kashmiris' statement on this illegally occupied region is concerned. This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the Sudan crisis and the updates as far as those are concerned. Now, a week-long ceasefire has been agreed by both the warring factions in Sudan to allow for the delivery of aid that is extremely needed in a country where people are in desperate need of medicine, food, water, and whatnot, the necessities as far as the life are concerned. Will this truce hold? This is something that needs to be seen. This is going to be our second segment. Our third story concerns SpaceX capsule that has carried 2 Saudi astronauts docked with the International Space Station yesterday as part of a private mission that was chartered by Axiom Space. Now, the first Saudi woman is also amongst these astronauts to have entered space, and of course they represent their country, that is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That is the first. And then finally, we'll be talking about the students and the faculty of the Pakistan Navy Engineering College at the National University of Sciences and Technology, otherwise known as NUST, that have now unveiled their Formula Electric racing car at a local hotel yesterday, and this car will be participating in an international rally in the United Kingdom later this year. This is going to be our final story. Let's begin with our first story, and that concerns the G20 summit, Pakistan's resolve to stand by the Kashmiri brethren, and of course our Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Saab, who is in Azad Jammu and Kashmir, to highlight the atrocities of the Kashmiris and also to stand unified in this stance that the people in India illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir have taken against the brutalities of the Indian occupation forces. More in the following report.
The Modi-led Indian regime has turned an illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir into military fortress on the occasion of the G20 meeting, starting from today, with a key member China along with Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Egypt staying away from it. In an attempt to depict false normalcy in occupied valley, the third meeting of the G20 Tourism Working Group under India's presidency is being held from the 22nd to the 24th of May in Srinagar. Since the Indian government started preparations for G20 meeting, atrocious reports of human rights violations continue to pour in from northern and southern parts of the valley and Muslim-majority areas adjacent to line of control, where the Indian Army and its paramilitary forces have been conducting frequent raids and search operations. Prisons and torture centres in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir are full of innocent victims who have been arrested by Indian occupation forces since preparations for holding the G20 event began in the territory. United Nations Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, Deverenes, issued a statement last week accusing India of seeking to normalise the brutal and repressive denial of democratic and other rights of Kashmiri Muslims and minorities by holding the G20 meeting there. While the cosmetic beautification campaign in Srinagar and other places goes under full glare of the media, what is really happening behind the scenes in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is horrendous. That must be a cause of serious concern for all, especially the G20 nations.
Former Ambassador Ali Sarwar Naqvi joins us online. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us. Sir, let's begin with the boycott that we have seen across the divide, that is in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and in Azad Jammu and Kashmir also, against this holding of the G20 summit by India in the held valley. What message is getting across through this boycott, this shutdown?
Well, in the first place, I think, Umar, the decision of the Indian government to schedule such a meeting in a disputed territory is in gross violation of international law and on the violation of the specific resolutions of the United Nations Security Council on Kashmir. It was a very provocative an outrageous act that cannot be condemned, even if one tries very hard to do so, because you made these points that this gross violation is so apparent and manifest that one must comment upon it.
Do you feel that this boycott, Sarwar Naqvi sahab, do you feel that this boycott, sir, by the Kashmiris in the Indian held valley has internationalized this issue? On top of that, what I see a lot in the international media is that instead of this event, highlighting what India wanted, that is normalizing the whole Kashmir dispute, has in fact highlighted this Kashmir dispute again on an international level. Do you feel this is not a diplomatic failure as far as India is concerned?
Yes, this is what is called that the initiative has boomeranged, because if you throw a boomerang up in the air, it comes and hits you instead of hitting somebody else. So the Indian government's initiative in this in holding this meeting has given it the wrong kind of projection, because the international media has highlighted the total rejection and in fact public opposition to the meeting by the people of Kashmir. Secondly, a number of very important countries in the G20 group have effectively boycotted this meeting because they have not participated, which, as you mentioned, can be mentioned as China and Saudi Arabia and Indonesia.
Turkey, Egypt, Oman. This is what the Indian media is reporting, sir.
Yes. So, apart from the Western countries, which have ignored the voice of the Kashmiri people and which have condoned Indian actions all the way. And I was saying on another program yesterday, they do it, and therefore they are guilty of complicity with India in this unholy design of suppressing the people of Kashmir, and this is in line with what they have been doing so far. So let's forget about them. We must maintain our position, and we should welcome the support and the joining together of the countries that we have just mentioned in boycotting the meeting in Srinagar.
Of course, and Pakistan's stance is more than evident, with our Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari in the Azad Jammu and Kashmir region since the last couple of days, and now also addressing procession in Bagh and highlighting Pakistan's stance as far as this Kashmir dispute is concerned, of which Pakistan is party. Why does India want to internalize this dispute, in your point of view?
Well, India has been doing that going back to the revocation of Article 370 and 35A in 2019, when they tried to internalize the issue. But the large majority of countries did not even think about it or mention it, and they ignored it. Now, in similar vein, India is again trying to bring international delegates to Srinagar to try and show that it is part of India and fully integrated into India. But the nature of the issue is that it is a disputed territory, and that the people of Jammu and Kashmir are opposed to Indian rule and Indian control, and will therefore oppose the holding of this meeting in Srinagar. So these are self-evident facts, and the Indian government cannot whitewash it in any manner.
But it has tried to
Therefore, this
whitewash
whole
it,
thing.
Ali Sarwar Naqvi Sahab, that you cannot deny. The fact that India has tried its level best to whitewash it, to normalize what is happening in the Indian Held Valley, to normalize what the Indian Held Valley represents for its people, for the Kashmiris that have been languishing there, for demanding their right to self-determination. But you also see a new wave of terror, a new wave of violence that has escalated in the Indian Held Valley a couple of days before this G20 summit started. Do you feel that all these atrocities that are going on in the so-called name of security will have an impact for the region? And also, do you feel that the international bodies will react to this violence as well in the long run or in the short run maybe?
Yes, I think now they are probably seeing at first hand the heavy security, the cordoning off of the conference venue, and the apparent signs of the unhappiness and dismissal of the entire initiative by the people of Jammu and Kashmir, by the people who are on the streets. And these people are not at all welcoming, let alone welcoming. They are showing their total rejection of all this. So I think the international community cannot ignore this for a long time now. The time has perhaps come that they will have to take note of it. Now, as to how far they go, that we don't know. But they cannot just let this completely pass by without their even noticing it.
Now, Ali Sarwar Naqvi Sahab, you talked about the world and the reaction by the world that needs to be more proactive now as far as the Kashmir situation is concerned. Let's talk about international media that has been highlighting the G20 summit. I'll like to quote The Guardian that commented on the G20 meeting that India's presidency of the group has become mired in controversy after boycott by China under important member countries. AFP, which is based in France, says Delhi seeks to project an image of normality in a region racked for decades by violence. Don't you feel that this time the international media has sided with the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
Yes. You see, Omar, actually the governments are very hesitant in expressing any view on this. But the media is now openly reporting on the situation in Kashmir, carrying long reports from the New York Times and Washington Post in the US to The Guardian, as you quoted, in London, Le Monde in France, Der Spiegel in Germany, even as far away as Asahi Shimbun in Japan. All these famous newspapers or highly regarded newspapers are reporting on the Indian atrocities in Kashmir and the failure of India to project their leadership of the G20 because of the controversy that has come into it.
True.
So
yes.
The international media is going to continue reporting, and I think the momentum will be built up soon when they will be pressing their governments to take some position on it.
All right. Also, this is a moot that is happening in the Indian Held Valley on tourism. Just a layman's question to you: how can you have a moot, a summit on tourism in closed conference halls next to areas that are being patrolled by commandos and with surveillance drones that are overhead everywhere in the Held Valley? Do you feel that this is an environment conducive for tourism?
Well, this is a very good question, and I think that the answer lies in what we have discussed just now, that the Indian government has failed to create that environment of normality and of good business, and therefore the tourist sector, tourism sector cannot be benefiting from it, and in fact would lose in credibility because of all the actions of the Indian government.
Ali Sarwar Naqvi sahab, also, special permissions have been granted for international tourists this time during the summit to visit the Indian held valley. But these are special permissions just for the G20 summit. Otherwise, they are not allowed to visit the area. Also, the UN MOGIP is not allowed to go to the Indian disputed region of Jammu and Kashmir. Isn't this very hypocritical when it comes to India's stance, so-called stance on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, India, Omar, is practicing the art of double-faced conduct. They show one face to the world, they show another face to their own people, and look at their treatment of the minorities. I mean, it is an outrage. So the Indian government is trying to, twist reality into something else. And this will not work. I mean, it goes against the law of physics apart from everything else. It goes against the laws of nature, if not anything else. So the Indian government is, as I said, covering up on Kashmir, whitewashing the Kashmir issue, and giving the impression that they are running a very normal state, which is not the case at all.
Also, Ali Sarwar Naqvi sahab, you talked about different laws. Let's talk about human rights laws. Let's talk about all the different human rights organizations that have issued papers and papers with facts and figures on the actual situation in the Indian held valley. Let's also talk about Pakistan's fact sheet that has also been distributed to all the important countries and the United Nations as far as the atrocities in the Indian held valley are concerned. Let's also talk about the draconian laws that have been propulsed and propagated during the Modi-held regime. Is India, in your point of view, successful as far as its heinous designs in the Indian held valley is concerned, to some extent or to a large extent? What's your take on that?
Well, Omar, there are two parts to what the Indians are doing. One, they are trying to suppress the people, pass laws, legislation, and take all kinds of actions to browbeat the people, to put them under and not let them sort of stand up and face them. That is one. That the POTA and the PATA and all these laws of maintenance of public order, fighting terrorism, this and that. And the other is to give an impression to the outside world that everything is normal in Kashmir and that it is fully integrated into the Indian Union and the people of Kashmir are going along with it. That both these, I mean, one is offensive action and the other is a kind of cover-up action. So I think both are to be condemned and both are wrong. But the second action is the manifest in the failure in Srinagar in the meeting that they are holding on tourism, which is a crying shame, because there is, instead of projecting tourism, it will in fact raise questions about the.
And I really hope, Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab, that those journalists, those international journalists who've been given the authorization to visit the held valley during this summit will also report on the actual situation in the Indian held valley instead of just, concentrating on this 3-day summit. Which brings me to the United Nations, Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab. How important has been their role and is their role at this moment, at this juncture, because it is under the United Nations auspices that the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is considered and has been documented to be a disputed region, and where resolutions have been passed on numerous occasions so that the people can have their right to self-determination.
Yes, I mean, the United Nations is guilty of inaction. If nothing else, I mean, that is also an understatement, because they should be condemning the Indian action and not just, act on what the resolutions are. The point is that you mentioned the UNMOGIP, the United Nations military observer group on India and Pakistan. And the Indians have not allowed the UNMOGIP to go into Indian occupied, illegally occupied Kashmir. And the resolutions of the Security Council. And last year, coming to recent events, last year the Security Council met twice to discuss the situation in Kashmir, and they held informal consultations, but the Western countries stopped the Security Council from holding a formal session because they said that this was not needed. So the Western countries are complicit, as I said, in Indian the people of Kashmir. And
All right, that
secondly, the United Nations is not doing what it's expected to do.
But that is because of the Security Council, because there are members in the Security Council that veto any resolution that is passed on the Indian Hill Valley. So this is a kind of a limbo in which this current situation remains. But I really hope, Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab, that some kind of development comes out of it. If not from the United Nations, then from the other organizations like the OIC, the Arab League, the SCO, and the regional countries that surround India, that can maybe push for a resolution for people of the Indian Hill Valley to finally, decide what they want to do. It's all that Pakistan wants, that the people of the Indian Hill Valley be given their right to decide whether they want to stay in India, whether they want to accede to Pakistan. They can decide. Give them the right to decide. Why are you so afraid? You are afraid because you know what the actuality will be once you give them their right to self-determination. Thank you so very much, Ali Sarwar Naqvi Saab, former ambassador, to have joined us, to have talked to us about the G20 summit, India's stance on normalizing the situation, and the way the international bodies are reacting to it. The countries that are not attending it is also sending a very clear message to India that this is their diplomatic failure. Let's come to our second segment, and that concerns the updates as far as the Sudan crisis is concerned. A week-long ceasefire has been agreed upon by the two warring factions. Will it sustain itself? Will the people finally get the water, the food and the medicine that they so need? More in the following report.
The eruption of fighting in the Sudanese capital brought to Khartoum 7 million people the realities of Sudan's multiple fault lines. Fighting has been raging on between warring factions, the country's army and a powerful paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces. A week-long ceasefire period agreed by Sudan's warring factions of 5 weeks of fierce battles and designed to allow for the delivery of aid has begun after the army conducted heavy airstrikes across the capital Khartoum against its paramilitary rivals. The ceasefire deal includes a monitoring mechanism involving the army and the RSF, as well as representatives from Saudi Arabia and the US, which brokered the agreement after talks in Jeddah. Though fighting has continued through previous ceasefires, this is the first truce to be formally agreed following negotiations. United Nations Special Envoy to Sudan, Volker Perthes, warned that the fighting could turn into an ethnic-driven conflict if the warring parties do not respect and extend the ceasefire. The deal has raised hopes of a pause in fighting that erupted on 15th of April and has driven nearly 1.1 million people from their homes, including more than 250,000 who have fled into neighbouring countries.
Dr. Farah Naz, who is an international affairs expert, joins us online. Dr. Farah, thank you very much to have joined us. It had been some time that we had talked online on different issues. Now let's talk about Sudan. Let's talk about this week-long ceasefire that has been announced by both the warring factions. Will it sustain itself for the week, or do you feel that fighting will begin soon enough?
Hello, Omar.
Some kind of a technical issue. We are getting back to Dr. Farah Naz. As soon as we do get to her, we will be discussing the issue of Sudan as well. Dr. Farah Naz, welcome back. Some kind of a technical glitch, but nevertheless, what is your expectation of this week-long truce that has been announced by both the warring factions in Sudan?
I think we will pray and hope that this week of ceasefire, it continues and it's sustained over there, because America is involved and Saudi Arabia is involved in this decision. Because the cost of the war is too big to handle, and where it is now getting under discussion that the Sudan war is going to have spillover effects on the region. So all regional states, including Saudi Arabia, they will make sure that the ceasefire remain intact, and it is something that can achieve the larger objectives. If we go back and check the atrocities of what has happened so far, we have been hearing about that more than 200,000 migrants have migrated from Sudan, including various nationalities, and around 700,000 people have been turned as IDPs. The cost of the war is too big. And what actually they are trying to achieve, it's really getting debatable at this stage, where two strong armies within the country are fighting with one another and risking the life of many Sudan and Sudanese people and the communities, where refugees need lots of support from the international community and the regional states, where we can see that laws and norms of war are not met over here. We can also see that health sector is badly affected, where medical practitioners, they are targeted, they are killed, and also the medicine supplies are not reaching out. We can see rape is again a serious problem that is prevailing in Sudan. So if we look at the overall system, I think this is in the best interest of all the regional states that Sudan crisis or Sudan conflict or this war comes to an end, at least if not for long, but for a short period of time, so they can revive and think about how to resolve the conflict altogether.
Now, also, Dr. Farah, let's talk about the migration as a result of this fighting that has happened in Sudan, that has been happening since quite some time. Now, as far as the United Nations Refugee Agency is concerned, more than 1 million people have been displaced in the last 5 weeks of fighting in Sudan. 700,000 displaced just in the past week. How has this refugee crisis, has it shaped the socio-economic, political dynamic of the region, and how will it shape the socio-political dynamic of the region in the coming days and weeks as well?
I think this is going to be a serious problem for all the regional countries, where the world at large is not free from all the migrants and migration issues. We can see there is an active war, Russia-Ukraine conflict going on, where those people are also trying to take refuge in other neighboring countries. Now, who will give access to Sudanese people that they are also migrating from Sudan and trying to find refuge in the neighborhood? So it will have, and the neighborhood, if we go and check it out, all are struggling economies. They are not very powerful economies. So it will be an additional burden on their existing economic situations, and they will not be able to sustain in the current scenario. So they will definitely push the international community to find a resolve to all this migration crisis, where they need health facilities, they need medical facilities at urgent needs, and they need like the children, which are really getting, become a target of all of that. And we are hearing stories about forcefully displaced people. So in that context, I think Saudi Arabia has played its due share, its due role of trying to find a resolved or a ceasefire solution to the existing problem, so they can get a break from the war, and then they come and bring the two parties together and try to resolve the issue between the two of them. Otherwise, it will get impossible for two strong armies to come to terms with one another. And Sudan cannot afford it, I must say that. If you go back and check it out, Sudan is having imports from many powerful countries, including China, which is the highest, and then followed by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Turkey, and United States as well. So all those countries who are having trade relationship with Sudan, they will try to maintain their relationships as normal as possible, because this is in the best interest of all the states and their stakes involvement in Sudan. And strategically, Sudan is located in such a place where we are now hearing about Djibouti as being one of the most prominent and most important areas when it comes to BRI and CPEC project. So for the successful completion of the BRI and its linkages and associations, we are hearing lots of stories about that many powerful countries, they are stationing their troops in Djibouti, and Djibouti is just next door. So Sudan's sustainability, its peaceful resolve to the existing problem, is in the best interest of all the regional countries and all those states whose stakes are involved in Sudan. I think it's something that they will be pushing forward towards. Here, through your program and through your... Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Farah, I'd also like to understand there are so many different dimensions to this conflict as we speak since it began in the month of April this year. One of that aspect is on ethnicities. You know, the United Nations warns, and I'd like to quote the United Nations Special Envoy to Sudan, Volker Perthes, who has warned yesterday that the fighting could turn into an ethnic-driven conflict if the warring parties did not respect and extend this ceasefire. Do you feel there is such a danger?
Yes, there is, obviously, because two armed formations, they are, fighting with one another, and it is leading towards intercommunal tensions among the societies. The society is divided between two factions at this stage, where one is supporting one side, another army is supporting the another side. And both Al-Burhan and Hamidi, they are both very powerful. If we disregard that their powerful position, we will be mistaken. We also need to see that Al-Burhan, the Sudanese army, if I put it that way, they are having strong relationship with many, many powerful countries. And that includes United States and its interest in Africa and the Middle East in terms of counter-terrorism measures is very interested. Then Al-Burhan recent visit to Moscow, where they agreed upon that Moscow is going to open its base in Sudan, and then they, in return, Al-Burhan said that they have no problem with opening bases in Sudan unless and until all states can do it, unless and until it poses threat to its national security. So we can see there is a soft, what's called power mechanism happening between Sudan and Russia. Probably it is not in the best interest of the larger international norms. That's why we can see a conflict in Sudan. Probably it is something, it's yet under observation, that whether it is a created conflict or it is an organic one. If it is a created conflict, that could be all based on the international power rivalry with one another, and then leading towards the creation of these ethnic crises within Sudan, leading towards a distribution of the two stronger army factions, making them stand against one another and demanding their due right that they need to be in power. They remain in good terms with one another every now and then, but suddenly something pop up. So we have to see the larger picture. What is happening? What sort of diplomatic relations they are having with the powerful countries where it is all happening. I also need you to draw your attention towards the food and the humanitarian crisis that is developing out of.
But that is why the ceasefire has happened, so that the food can arrive to the people who are in need of that, because there's a huge crisis that has already developed. The United Nations also talks about half of Sudan's population that needs humanitarian aid, has asked for $3 billion as so that they can help Sudan. Sudan is more or less, if I'm not wrong, at the brink of a humanitarian crisis. If you just look at the the number, this ceasefire is so important at this time, so that the people, the children, the women who are in desperate need of food, water and medicine can get access to it. What's your take?
Exactly. That's the main reason that Saudi Arabia, including America, they came forward and they sat together and they started this negotiation, because they are afraid of that the spillover effect of all these crises, like food crisis, shortage of humanitarian supplies, shortage of medical assistance, children dying of hunger, children dying of the sexually transmitted problems that is happening there, and even women becoming a target of rape and torture. They cannot sustain it. It will definitely have spillover effects in all the neighborhood, who are already struggling through a loss of ifs and buts in their own systems. So to control that, this immediate ceasefire was need of the hour. That's why all these countries, they try to stop it so they can get a breathing spot, and then they try to bring the two parties together and try to resolve, because they cannot afford it. And I must say, it's not only this part which is getting affected with food and humanitarian crisis. We can see Europe is getting affected with that. Can the world sustain with these kind of prolonged humanitarian crisis forever, where every region is getting affected with that? I think no, we cannot sustain with that. We need to find a resolve as soon as possible. Otherwise,
of course, that is extremely important. Some kind of a negotiated truce that could be long term between the two warring factions. Because if you look at the situation as it is today, since the 15th of April, when the fighting actually began, 705 people at least have been killed. 5,287 people have been more or less injured, and 1.1 million people have been displaced. These killings also bring me to the West Darfur region. Do you feel that this is creating some kind of a vacuum in the West Darfur region, where the militias have reportedly killed hundreds of people in one of its regions, that is Al Janina?
Well, I think this can create a vacuum to a certain extent, but I must say it is more leading towards communal conflict, where the communities are probably moving towards fighting with one another, which is more dangerous as compared to more like, area specific. No, to me, it's more community specific, where one is supporting one party, another is supporting another party. We have seen in the past when the South Sudan got separated, and this is how there was a border placed between the two of them. So are they going to place another border in the times to come? It will be like shrinking the existence of Sudan in African continent, and it has spillover effects on Middle East. This is not going to be acceptable. If we geographically look at Sudan in its location, it is very, very important, very important. On one side is Egypt, followed by Red Sea, which is like, home to so many problems and atrocities already. So can they survive with the existing international problems and creating a new set of problems, and what they want to achieve? What is their larger goal? What is their larger objective? We have to weigh that first, and we need to identify why these two factions are at first place fighting with one another. Till date, I'm unable to understand what are they fighting for. I am not able to comprehend.
But Dr. Farah, if you look at the history of Sudan, there have been 16 coups in the past as well, and now this conflict that is happening. This said, I'd like to understand also how the situation in Khartoum will be handled, because do you feel that the RSF or the current army in Sudan is understands the situation as far as Khartoum is concerned? Can they stabilize Khartoum? As far as ceasefire is concerned, a lot of witnesses in Khartoum say that the situation remains relatively calm. But how long will this calm remain?
Well, I think they do not understand the nitty-gritty of the situation at the moment. They do not understand what will be its larger what's called like in a times to come. It will have more long-lasting impacts. They're not realizing it at this stage. Probably it's at this stage it's more politically driven, politically motivated kind of conflict between the two factions and two formalities. But in the long run, they're going to face a lot of consequences to this conflict. We also need to see what are the larger objectives. Do they really want to fight one army and they want to stand as as a stronger army? Are they trying to defeat one another? To me, I think it's not like that.
But Dr. Sarwar, the fact also remains that there are a lot of forces that are working behind these two factions as well. Yeah. There are a lot of geopolitical, geo-economic interests that certain parties might have that could make this conflict continue for a longer period of time, so that the instability continues, so that other projects in the region cannot sustain themselves. Don't you feel this theory is also somewhere true?
It makes very good sense to me, because I can see Djibouti right next door. I was quite amazed when the conflict started and there were hundreds of thousands of Indians evacuating from Sudan. And at first place, I was wondering what were they doing there. They were too many in number, and the Indian government was trying to evacuate them, bring them back, and provide all special chartered planes for them and all of that. So at first place, what were they doing? Then they explained that they had probably some, like from Indira Gandhi time, some kind of trade relationship and blah blah. But that justification does not make sense to me. It's more like, as I think I provided hints between my talks earlier as well, it's more a politically motivated conflict, politically motivated crisis. It's created. It's not organic in nature. Because I can see BRI next door happening. I can see American interest in the Middle East. I can see American interest in Africa. I can see Saudi Arabia popping out to be somewhat very important as a country in the existing geopolitical situation. And then in this environment, Saudi Arabia again playing a very important role in trying to bring ceasefire into the existing Sudan crisis. This is way too big. And where we also can see that when Al-Burhan paid a visit to Moscow, after this, all of this started. So this means somebody got offended with all those arrangements of why Russia will be going to open a base in Sudan. So they wanted to, to put a break somewhere, and that break led towards, escalation of this conflict in Sudan. With due apology, I would say in today's world, in the international system, international states do not care about human loss. They do not care about humanitarian crisis, food crisis, children dying of hunger, no medical supplies available. All they care about is sustaining their strategic position in region and in the international system, which is against the set norms of the way the system should operate. I at times think about that probably now the norms, the international norms, needs to be revisited, where interest should be above and above humanity, where humanity should be considered something below and somewhere down the list, because nobody care about why women. They always talk about women empowerment, women this and that, but when it comes to conflict which are created, women are the first set of people who are getting raped and sexually molested and abused. Nobody talk about that, why they are creating such conflicts in the first place. And we know there are very powerful states who could have put a stop there on Sudan, not to bring this conflict into such a very barbaric position. It could have happened, but they never were interested. All they're interested in, what will I get from this conflict? Let me destabilize this region. Let me destabilize this country. And towards the end, I will get lost what I want to achieve, being a very powerful and hegemonic state in that region and in the world politics. I'm so sorry, but this is how the world has shaped up.
That is so true, Dr. Farah, but the fact remains that there are so many different dimensions, as I said earlier during our discussion, to this conflict, that only time will tell as to how these different dimensions will play out together or individually. But this said, the RSF and the SAF was designed to be complementary rather than be in conflict. And this conflict in Khartoum puts, a lot of stress not only on the neighboring countries, but on the state of Khartoum itself. This rift between Al-Burhan and Hemeti that has weakened the state. How much more weakening will happen in Sudan as the days pass by, only time will tell. But let's hope for the time being that this week-long truce stays and nothing happens during this week. We hope for the best and let's see what happens. Thank you so very much, Dr. Farah, to have joined us, to have talked to us about these updates, especially regarding the truce between the two factions in Sudan. We only hope for peace, and let's hope peace prevails. Let's come to our last two stories. The first concerns the first Saudi astronauts that have been blasted off to a space station. A SpaceX capsule has carried 2 Saudi astronauts docked with the International Space Station yesterday as part of a private mission chartered by Axiom Space. Now, Rayana Barnavi, who is a scientist who has also now become the first Saudi woman to go into space, and Ali Al-Karni, who is a trained fighter pilot, are the first 2 people from their country to go into the orbit outpost. And of course, this mission, that is named AX2, is the second fully private mission to visit the space station, followed by a first in April of 2022. The members of this AX2 mission will stay for about 10 days and will carry out about 20 experiments. This mission is not Saudi Arabia's first foray into space. That we also wanted to tell you, because in 1985, Prince Sultan bin Salman bin Abdulaziz, an Air Force pilot, took part in a US organized space voyage, and he was also part of all of the spectators who were watching this. He said, God willing, this is just the beginning. Let's hope our Saudi friends all the very best with this space mission. Let's come to our last stories, and that concerns NUST students who have unveiled a Formula electric racing car. They belong to the Pakistan Navy Engineering College at NUST and have unveiled this racing car at a local hotel here yesterday. The building of this EV is an apparently inspirational and motivational journey for the students as well. They showed a lot of videos concerning this as well. This is an engineering competition that is held annually in the World Formula Student. This is the name of the engineering competition that is held every year in the world, in which teams from around the world design, build, test and race a small scale Formula style racing car. These students had first represented Pakistan in Germany in 2012, but at that time their car could not pass technical inspection. But now they are all ready and geared up with this latest invention of their car to showcase to the world that Pakistan is not behind, especially when it comes to technical expertise. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories, segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.